copy of your
testimony.
No, not the big packet,
Just the testimony itself.
maybe there's an extra one floating around here.
No, I didn't pass out copies. I hadn't made copies of the testimony itself.
Does anybody else want a copy of, it sort of tells you where, you know, it's sort of like a guide to this packet. Is anyone interested in it? Okay. You have the packet.
But in the packet, it's in the bill itself.
The first section where
Oh,
it
okay,
says sources.
all right, thank you very much. So overwhelmed this week. I don't know where I'm going. This technology, I mean,
Want to see here? I got more information on here.
it's so scary. It really is.
I'll give them what I be submitting.
He's amazing.
I'm sorry, we're only going to take those speakers who have signed pink cards from the previous
Okay,
year.
good, thank you.
And I did announce that at the hearing when I was And some of these people may not be here. However, I would ask those of you, we still have about 20, and we have to get that in before we conclude at 12:30. Sorry. We have to conclude before that if I'm going to allow my meeting to have anything to eat before we go into executive session. So, and it's not good to go into executive session on an empty stomach. So,
No, it's not.
for anybody.
Everything will get ITO.
We're waiting for Representative Spang and also Representative Latch.
You can.
And I thank those that have indicated less than 1 minute, 1 minute. And I would have to caution anyone who's asked for more than 2 or 3, I'm going to ask you to limit your testimony to 3 or 4 minutes. All right, with that, we will open the hearing on, the continued hearing on House Bill 1508, which is a bill terminating state participation in the Common Core educational standards. Again, if you are here to oppose or support the bill, please, and do not wish to testify, would you please sign your name on the blue sheet? And I am not accepting any new pink cards today, because we have probably about 20 here in a very limited period of time. On the other hand, if we find that most of them aren't here, well, then we may have some flexibility in that policy. All right, the first person who signed up is Martha Spalding. Then I'll call and recognize Angela Pont, who supports the bill. Michelle Levin, who supports the bill. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll be able to keep my statements even more brief because I now have written testimony for you.
Thank you.
For the record, my name is Michelle Lavelle. I represent the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and I'm here to support the bill, and my remarks will focus on the special education student and gifted student, the kids at the end of the spectrum, the kids that experts say will not have their needs met with Common Core and the standardized assessments that go with that. In my written testimony and accompanying documents, I listed a number of sources that speak to this issue. As a matter of fact, the National Education Association believes that, quote, we're talking about students with disabilities who have documented life-impacting issues, that if they could do everything else that the other students were doing, they'd be doing that. We have to take an individualized look at how we're assessing them. Students don't fall on the normal bell curve. Other experts who support Common Core agree that these special education students will not have their needs met. For example, an expert at the Center for College and Career Readiness told parents that, quote, special needs students are not being addressed or accommodated with the Common Core state standards. Further, and I've included some examples of kids that have had issues with these assessments and these standards, how they do not, they're not appropriate for these children. And further, if you were to liken Common Core and these standards to a PE exam, how could you possibly ask students in wheelchairs to run a quarter mile and meet those same thresholds of understanding, but yet somehow these standards are being held at the cognitive level? That's just grossly inappropriate. Common Core also does a disservice to the bright and talented students as well. The National Association for Gifted Children says children with disabilities and advanced learners are going to need more. Further, even the Common Core website admits to this. The Common Core website says the standards set grade-specific standards but do not define the intervention methods or materials necessary to support students who are well below or well above grade expectations. Further, Common Core readily says no set of grade-specific standards can fully reflect the great variety in abilities, needs, learning rates, and achievement levels of students in any given classroom. I give some additional examples, but essentially it means the kids at the end of the spectrum at either end will not have their needs met. So until we have a way of dealing with this, I would say Common Core is not appropriate for a significant portion of our standards for our children and are inappropriate then for New Hampshire.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Brendan has a
Thank you,
question.
Madam Chair. I have a relatively simple question, and thank you for taking it. Is it your belief now that gifted children are being adequately served under No Child Left Behind?
I don't believe that No Child Left Behind is adequate either. I think we can do better.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Kelly Ray or Roy. Lee.
Thank you very much. I think I wrote down 2 minutes, but it'll be fast for that. Hello, my name is Kelly Roy. I am a New Hampshire resident and a mother of a 6th grader and a 10th grader. While it is apparent that our educational system in the state and nation needs an overhaul, I am opposed to the Common Core standards. As a woman who takes education very seriously, especially that of my children, I have many concerns about the standards. I will leave out my great concern about the databases and data mining and focus on the standards themselves. The ELA standards are not rigorous. I personally listened to other experts, specifically Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who's credited with developing one of the country's strongest set of academic standards for K through 12, and was appointed to the Common Core Validation Committee, of which she would not sign off on. I listened to her talk about how the ELA standards as written are not rigorous, need to be revised, contain grammatical errors, and many states such as Massachusetts have had to water down their own standards to come into alignment with that. 2, Common Core standards create an emphasis on writing over reading. I would like to know has it ever made sense that placing an emphasis on writing over reading would create good readers? If our children do not develop better reading comprehension, they will do poorly in other subjects as well. There is already a large problem with reading and comprehension levels in the United States, where children are graduating with a reading level far below average. This approach would be more detrimental. Not to mention, as a woman with an English background, I am highly opposed to a focus on informational texts and literary excerpts versus reading great literary pieces, which besides developing better reading comprehension, also develops critical thinking skills and even writing techniques. And finally, I believe that this is an overreach of the federal government, which would remove local control because there would be no need for it. This greatly concerns me a lot. There has never been a good example of federal government taking over educational standards and it going through with success. I believe that the local government, school boards, parents, etc., need to be setting the standards. Our children do deserve better, but I do not believe that Common Core is that better. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions for Ms. Roy?
May I have a copy of your testimony?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again, and the chair will recognize Dr. Mark Joyce. Welcome.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'll be briefer than normal. Simply to reiterate the written testimony that I shared with you at the advent of the last hearing. From our perspective, we believe the Common Core sets rigorous goals and standards, but the control of the ultimate standards in a local school district still remain with the school board and that school community. They are then able to raise those, to alter those, to accommodate the special needs or gifted needs of our students. I would reflect personally that in my 43 years in the business, I believe that the Common Core goals are probably the one most significant improvement that has come to New Hampshire education. It allows us to establish rigorous goals for all children, and it leaves the final control in the hands of the local school board. In my testimony, I identified 6 different pieces of concern that have been expressed and our perspective in opposition to those. Again, my testimony is in support of New Hampshire School Administrators Association as well as New Hampshire Special Education Administrators. I would simply close with that and be open to any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions for Dr. Joyce? Representative Bond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking the question. Can you name what other federal education program was a success?
I think there are many. I think Title I has been a success at relieving the impact of poverty on children, and it has for 60 years. I think IDEA has been a tremendous success because it has included students who were previously excluded from the public school experience. I believe our work with homeless education has also been a benefit to children who find themselves in those circumstances.
Well, what I meant was what educational developments, like No Child Left Behind, 2000, or whatever, has been a success.
Well, again, I would go back. No Child Left Behind is another name for Title I. It is a program that was designed 60 years ago to help students at risk. In 2001, its name was changed, but it still is the ESEA. IDEA is an educational reform effort, significantly changed the landscape for schools. And so I think those remain as successful federal initiatives that were voluntarily adopted by districts as a condition of funding.
Yes, Representative Stein.
I missed the earlier rundown of this, but could you explain, I think that the heart of the objections to this has to do with students with disabilities taking the same test. Could you address that?
Well, throughout our educational reform efforts, all children were expected to meet high standards. There is an exception for those significantly challenged and handicapped individuals. Now it's in the form of the ALT assessment. The ALT assessment is being redesigned here in New Hampshire. We believe it's important that all children take assessment, because in the absence of that, we find ourselves able to perhaps ignore the achievement levels of certain students by only focusing on average. And so it is important that they're tested. There are accommodations, however, in those for students with disabilities. So it's not as if they're found to be equal footing with no assistance. The accommodations are in the form of their IEP support, but then for those taking the ALT assessment, even more accommodation is given.
Representative Cordelli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. There has been a lot of testimony that the Common Core, or those aspects of the college and career readiness standards for New Hampshire, are not high enough, that there are deficiencies. If this bill was not a termination of those standards, but instead was a directive or a commission to look at setting higher standards than what we know as Common Core, would you be supportive of that effort?
Thank you for the question. I would not, because I don't think it's necessary. See, the Common Core establishes a baseline. Local school boards have full control now to establish more rigorous standards that they choose. In New Hampshire, our tradition is to let the local school board do that. So to impose a state-regulated, if you will, state-directed more rigorous standard would be a violation of the local control principles here. Again, I don't feel the need to have that exception because it's not needed. The local boards already have that authority.
I have one question. Do you know of any communities in New Hampshire that have already looked at the standards and are adapting them at the local level, either at a higher level or keeping them as they are, or modifying them in some way?
I think virtually every school district in New Hampshire has done that. And in my testimony, I cited that New Hampshire school and our curriculum instruction and assessment areas have been working to integrate the basic structures for 7 years. Now, they may be called their own local school district standards, but I think what you would find is they're very parallel to those of Common Core plus some, in addition to it. I believe you also received written testimony from Dr. Elaine Arbor, who is chair of one of our CIA regions. That represents part of the state that goes from Hanover to Massachusetts, from Amherst to Vermont. And they have met extensively, as all 5 of our regions have, monthly for the last 7 years.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Dr. Joyce. The chair would recognize Debbie Pueir. And then the next speaker will come is Sue Grant from Rochester. We will hold on to these speakers because the original time of this hearing was 11 o'clock. So some people may not be coming until 11 or so, hold on to them. Dr. Joseph, Hannon, Hannon.
Madam Speaker, could you indicate whether they were for or against?
Oh, yes, I could. That'd be good.
3 of them, 4, 5, 5 out of 6 are support.
I'm trying to alternate them, Representative Grenier, so, because we do have a stack of people going to speak in support, if they're here. So the chair will recognize Doris Hohenby, who I know is here.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Doris Hohenby, and I'm from Nashua. I'm here in support. Along with the elimination of Common Core state standards should be the removal of the regional liaisons tasked to implement those standards. I heard from the gentleman previous that they've been working regionally for 7 years. I know Mrs. Gage said they've only been operational 2 years. I don't know which it is, but who authorized these regional liaisons as members of the Commissioner's Extended Cabinet, as they're designated in the New Hampshire Flexibility, the SEA application, which is the No Child Left Behind waiver. The legislature did not establish the Commissioner's Extended Cabinet, and it's irrelevant that the participation in these regional liaisons is voluntary, given the impact of the high-stakes Smarter Balance assessments, which are definitely not voluntary. Teachers must be evaluated based on student performance on assessments which are currently not valid, appropriate, or objectively scored as required by state law, RSA 193C. Here are a few of the comments that the middle school teachers made to my Nashua school board member after taking the Smarter Balance practice assessments for grade level 8. They were shockingly negative experience, total grade level inappropriate, difficult even for some teachers with advanced degrees. Seems the test was designed more as a psychological or sociological experiment, not as a measure of academic learning. Who created the test anyway? It couldn't have been by professional educators. Another one said, this would be a crushing emotional experience for my students. Another, it is nothing less than child abuse for my special ed students in my classroom. And finally, one teacher said, I refuse to administer this test to my students. I ask this committee to eliminate the standards at the state level. Let the districts do what they may and support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions for Laura Cohen? Yes, Representative Grenier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. If I know in a school district that test was administered and the teachers were excited and felt it was a big step up, then I would have to ask you, in the survey of teachers, did you include all teachers, and were there any that were positive?
This wasn't my survey, and the teachers anonymously gave their comments to a member of my school board. And he wrote that up and submitted that to the legislature. That is his list, and I think that member is here today. So I would conclude that your survey was not what we'd call a statistical survey of all teachers, but you got this data specifically from a significant group, I admit, of teachers who were opposed to this. Is that how the survey went? I know it's not yours. This was a pilot or a field test of the Smarter Balance that the teachers were taking themselves, so they were familiar with it. That's my understanding. And I believe this is in Principal Nelson's school in Nashua. He came out and he spoke out against it as being age inappropriate. These teachers have not wanted to put themselves on the record as to being opposed because it risks their livelihood. I know there's some teachers that are happy to say they support it because there's no risk. So to be candid and to be a teacher at this juncture is difficult. This isn't New York State yet, where they're vociferous about their objections.
Thank you.
But to clarify, it's a very limited sample based on one attendance area in Nashua.
It was one middle school area,
Thank you.
grade 8.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. The chair will recognize David DeWitt. Then we'll recognize Heather Gage from the Department of Education. And Ms. Gage, you've asked for 10 minutes. We can't give you 10 minutes.
I'm not even going to be a minute, Chair. In fact, I'm not even going to really testify. I'm just going to tell you what's in the
You
file.
have written, so could you just address the highlights of it, please?
Yep, I won't even have to do that, ma'am. I'm gonna, you promised in the past that the committee reads the testimony, so I'm actually not gonna read the testimony, if that's okay. I'll just tell you what's in here, just so you know. One of the questions that we've received this week is around whether we have enough test items in our item bank for kneecap. To do another assessment. We did follow up with Measured Progress on that. There's a letter in there clarifying that they do not believe that they could do another assessment this year, but certainly would be supportive of anything that we would need to do in that area. I wanted to let you know that there's a letter in there on that. We also had questions, I think it was on Tuesday, around whether or not the Smarter Balance assessment would assess dispositions, which of course was a big conversation that we had in the last session. There's a letter from Smarter Balance in there confirming that would not be the case. So you have that letter in there, and then there's been several questions for the written testimony from Dr. Berry, and that is in the back of that as well. And then I just want to clarify one aspect that Ms. Doris had talked about with the regional liaisons. Regional liaisons, the folks that have come to the department to help us on a part-time basis with communication to the field and bringing information back to us so that we can better serve our schools, have been in place for almost 2 years now. Regional work around the state that is not dictated, mandated, required, any other word that you want to use in there, from the state have been going on for probably since the beginning of time. We in education, just like in healthcare and many other fields, we work on a regional basis to share resources and those kinds of things. That is not something that comes from the department. If you'll remember in my testimony, you can look back on that, I believe I gave you written testimony on that, with that the state was working outside its regulatory authority. There's information in there about the regional liaisons as well. So with that, I'll close my testimony and take any questions.
Representative Granger has a question, Representative Bohm has a question, Representative Cordelli has a question.
I didn't even testify.
Thank you for taking my question. If this bill were to be passed, and it would preclude, as you've read, any involvement of the Department of Education in Common Core, what would happen to all of the schools that have already implemented or have begun to implement this in terms of coming to the Department of Education for assistance, as they do on any type of program that we have had in the past? What would then be the restriction upon you regarding your ability to help these schools that are going to, that have already are going to continue to do common?
And thank you for the question. My understanding from the way that I'm reading the bill is that we would not be allowed to help them in any way regarding Common Core standards implementation, no matter what form or fashion the school district determined that they were going to use those standards.
Thank you.
Representative Bohm?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that question. One question. Smarter Balance is only going to test the knowledge and skills of literacy and mathematics. What about the other assessment of other areas that NECAP is now doing?
Science, is that, you're referring to science, which is the only other assessment that we have? NECAP will continue to do science. Absolutely. Or contract with Measured Progress, I believe is more appropriately.
Representative Cordelli, and then Representative Guiar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Just your comment to, or answer to Representative I think there are several districts, Alton, Manchester, that are looking at developing higher standards. Your remarks weren't that the department would not help them in that effort. Was that what you said?
My understanding is that we could not help them if they, because Alton's, I would actually separate the two school districts and the work that they're doing. You know, what my understanding in Manchester that's happening is they're using a floor of the Common Core perhaps, but they're building that their own standards. Mm-hmm. If there's any relationship at all in any standards that they've developed, and they're still in that process, to Common Core, that we couldn't, not that we wouldn't want to, but that we couldn't assist them. I could be wrong in that interpretation. Be happy to work with the sponsors on clarifying that. But the words are very specific in the bill, and I just wouldn't want to say that we could.
Right, so, I'm sorry. The bill aside, if there was no bill,
Yep.
would you be working, or if this bill is not passed, would you be assisting them in their efforts to develop higher standards?
If that's what they would like, if they came to us and asked for our assistance, we would do everything we could to help them, as we would with any school district.
One more.
If the bill instead was a commission to look at going beyond the quote Common Core ELA and math standards and developing higher standards, would that be something the department would support? And I don't want to necessarily put you on the hook for speaking for the department, but
No, I feel comfortable with reiterating what Dr. Joyce had mentioned earlier, that school districts can already do that. And we're certainly supportive of learning from their efforts and what they're doing. And we're actually really excited that Manchester is developing their own standards. We're going to be able to see what comes out of that and see how students are learning based on that. We're in education, so we're supposed to be learning and we're supposed to be growing. And it's all about that excitement about seeing what people can do with the experts around the table and learning from their students. So I don't think it would be necessary because schools can already do that.
Representative Greenmore.
Thank you for taking my question. I guess I'm a little confused because you said that the testing program with NECAP would still be going on with the Smarter Balance program.
No, I'm sorry.
Within that same framework, can you also say that you couldn't use NECAP?
I apologize for making that confusing. So we have three, if you think about it this way, we have three contracts with measured progress through an RFP process that was sent out. One of them is to do our alternative assessment that Dr. Joyce talked about before. One of them, in the past, this last year, we did our last, what we call our NECAP in mathematics and in reading and writing. And then we have another one with measured progress. We also call NECAP, because we do it with other states, the New England Consortium around science. So the science piece of that will still continue into this next year. You know, we always look at that contract every year to see where we're going, but for this next year, we're certainly continuing to move forward. There are other states, though, that have adopted other standards in science that were a part of the NECAP consortium. So we're working with Measured Progress to determine how is that going to affect us, since we have not adopted new standards in science at this point. But so think about them as three different contracts. The one that I mentioned is that they don't have the test item pool that the letter in the packet is regarding to, is the math and ELA portion of that. Smarter Balance would replace that particular test. They're two different tests.
Thank you. Representative Myler, we have to limit our questions, Representative Myler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. In the testimony that we have heard, and in the communications that we have gotten from people, one of the charges has been from these correspondence and testimony is that the Common Core has been implemented without input. Without input from the public, without input from professionals who are working on these standards, developing the local curriculum. Could you clarify for the committee exactly what has been the process for the engagement of people in the implementation of this?
Sure. So, and part of this is in the testimony too, so you'll have that in writing. But what happened before the Common Core was even adopted is we went out to, I mean, certainly just within all of the networks that occur naturally in New Hampshire, we worked with those folks, but we also deliberately went to various regions of the state. We talked a lot about regional hearings and those kinds of things in this committee, and we had those. We had over 200 formal responses from parents, teachers, and those kinds of things, and multiple times during the drafting process. We also have, I'm forgetting the number now, it's over 50 parents and teachers who submitted formal responses outside of that process directly to the writers of the Common Core during the development process. And remember, during the development process, there were multiple drafts of the Common Core, and each draft got, had taken into consideration the comments from the previous drafting process. And so we had several hundred people that participated in those meetings. The over 200 that I mentioned were just those that submitted formal comments to help us in that process. And then after all of the regional meetings happened and those kinds of things, then we also had a month-long feedback process that we normally do with any kind of rules or those kinds of things, where people submitted information to the State Board of Education before they took that up.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And Representative Lyon has a question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We won't have any lunch.
I got my lunch with me.
We won't have time for it.
Thank you for taking my question. We've heard from some that Common Core dumbs down subjects like literature, math. Could you please confirm for me that Common Core is not a curriculum?
I confirm that wholeheartedly, 100%. Yes, that is correct. And I also have that in writing as well, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, but thank you for the question, Representative Black, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair would recognize Rosemary Landry, who supports the bill. Then the chair will recognize Annalee Banfield, who, again, I will have to ask you to reduce the time of your testimony.
All right, I will try to shorten it up a bit for you. For the record, I'm
Especially
Anne-Marie.
when we've heard a lot of it before.
Anne-Marie Banfield with Cornerstone Action. We support 1508. There was a 4-week window between the final draft and when this was adopted. And so we had 4 weeks to look at the final draft of the standards. I've been looking at this for over 5 years. So that's how quickly that they were adopted. The Common Core standards were officially adopted by unelected members of the New Hampshire Board of Education in 2010. If you go back and watch the few hearings that were held, you will notice the discussion never includes an analysis of the Common Core standards versus state standards that were considered the best in the country. And that's where the problems begin. The New Hampshire Board of Education did not do the necessary work to evaluate the New Hampshire GLEs, GSEs to the standards that you'd find in states that were identified as having the best academic standards in the country. To quote Professor Stephen Wilson, mathematician from Johns Hopkins, and one who analyzed the math standards for the Fordham Institute, he says there is much to criticize about them, and there are several sets of standards, including those in California, the District of Columbia, Florida, Indiana, and Washington, that are clearly better. The Fordham Institute has come out in support of Common Core standards. However, you can see from their own mathematician who conducted the analysis that he admits that there are better math standards. So the question is, why would the state of New Hampshire fail to develop the best standards in the nation? Why are we settling for standards that even supporters acknowledge as inferior? There are dozens of missing math concepts from the Common Core standards. There is a mistake teaching long and short vowels, and even when Dr. Evers asked how to fix it, he was told they were unable to fix it. They've already been published. There's no way to fix anything. Professor McCullum, one of the math professors on the Common Core writing team, has been quoted as saying, the overall standards are not high, certainly not in comparison with other nations, including East Asia. What are some of the problems parents are seeing? I think that you saw many of them at the last hearing, so I'm not going to go through that. I am submitting written testimony from Dr. James Milgram. He sat on the math validation for Common Core and refused to sign off on them. There's also a heavy emphasis on explaining your work. No longer is it acceptable to solve a word problem or algebraic equation and show your work. The student is now expected to explain it. We see it on sample questions provided by Smarter Balanced, and we are seeing it in the Common Core aligned textbooks and curriculum. This approach automatically dooms students in elementary school who have reading difficulties who are not fluent in English. How all of this writing helps students with math has yet to be demonstrated. Common Core is looking more like the failed new math, fuzzy math programs that have led students straight to tutoring services or simply left them illiterate in mathematics. The way Common Core requires abstract thinking in young children will continue to put children who already struggle in math at a clear disadvantage. Forcing children to explain what they do not understand makes me wonder about the long-term impact on those children. It sounds like a wonderful way to kill the love of learning in math in young children. So why do people think Common Core is so difficult if it isn't so high? That's a good question. That is because Common Core requires children to explain their answer and to use particular words in a particular way. The actual academic expectation is low, but the approach is convoluted. This is why you will hear parents and teachers say it's a setup for failure. It is a disaster in many ways to teach kids multiple strategies for doing math. It adds confusion and the inability to master one algorithm. This is a big push from Common Core. My biggest concern with Common Core is the impact on special ed, but you heard about that, so I'm going to skip that. I fear that New Hampshire walked down another road to we passed a bill in order to find out what's in it. What are we seeing coming out of Common Core and new assessments has caused states to begin putting the brakes before moving forward. This issue will continue to grow because the standards, the math practices, and the exemplars are being rejected by parents across the country. The flawed Smarter Balanced assessment only adds to the anger and frustration from teachers who are beginning to see that they've become a target for education reform. Not a target to help improve the quality of education, but a scapegoat to a system run by bureaucrats who think that they know how to better run a classroom. I am done in like 30 seconds. I will conclude with this. Manchester and Alton have both publicly acknowledged their commitment to superior academic standards. Chairman of the New Hampshire Board of Education, Tom Raffio, acknowledged in an email to me that he is supportive of school districts that seek to develop higher and better quality academic standards for their students. I appreciate his commitment, but I question why the Department of Education would not make the same commitment at the state level. HB 1508 terminates our participation in Common Core. With that directive, the New Hampshire Department of Education can begin the work of setting the best standards for our children and finding ways to set teachers up for success. That should be the message we send with the passage of this legislation. I do have written testimony. I have a petition, an online petition with over 600 signatures to get it out of New Hampshire. There are more because I printed this off about a week ago. Now there's probably about another 100.
Representative Grenier?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. You were talking rather quickly, so
I was
you
trying
might
to get
have
through
to
it
help
quickly,
me.
and we thank her for doing
Yes.
that.
But you alluded to one individual who didn't sign off on the math part of this. How many did?
Off the top of my head, I read so much, I'm trying to, he was the only mathematician on the validation committee, so he was the only content expert on that committee. He refused to sign off on it. So the other ones that did sign off, I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I would just say that he's the only one that has worked on standards. He's the only one with a mathematics degree, PhD in mathematics. So I think that qualifies him as one of the leading experts. I think that's what it shows him. That's a good question. I think there were a few, but they did not have the math background that he does, or the standards expertise. You can read his testimony.
I do have a question. We have heard over and over again that the Common Core standards were reviewed by the State Board of Education and endorsed by the State Department of by the State Board of Education. That in endorsing them, they do not mandate that local school districts adopt them, but rather that local school districts look at the Common Core standards to implement them if they choose, as they are, to make them more rigorous or to adapt them in some way to their local school district. And that is good because we are a local controlled state. Yet this bill is asking us, as a state, to tell all the local school districts to eliminate, to stop the Common Core standards. That's what this bill is telling us. What is Cornerstone's position on the state telling local school districts to stop what they are doing after they have been working?
The way I read it was that the state stopped implementing the Common Core, but they terminate the Common Core standards. Quite frankly, what I would expect the state to do is exactly what the other states have done, like Texas, and said no to the Common Core standards and then elevate their standards. Right now, we're putting our students at a clear disadvantage. If our students
But you haven't answered my question. What is Cornerstone's position on the state telling all of the local school districts, regardless of where they are on the continuum of implementation of the Common Core state standards, to stop, terminate?
If it's terminated, we do go back to the old GLEs, the GSEs, am I correct about that? Would they go back to the old state standards? And at that point,
You're
what?
not answering my question, Ms.
But I'm trying to get clarification from you on what, if, from what I read the bill, it would terminate the Common Core standards in New Hampshire. That means we would default back to the old New Hampshire
No
standards,
Child Left
correct?
Behind.
Right.
Correct.
So at that point, I would hope that our state would then begin the work of what other states have done, and that is to elevate the standards, to be the best. Why are we not shooting for the top?
Thank you for your testimony.
Madam Chair.
Oh, Reverend Myler.
Yeah, I just, thank you, and thank you, Mike. I just want to clarify something. I have a list here of Common Core State Initiative, the work team that was there. 29 people were on that team. 18 of the 29 were mathematicians. So there are more.
Are you talking about mathematicians or
I'm
math
talking
educators?
mathematicians.
Because there's a difference. And
Mathematicians.
I think Professor Milgram may address that in his testimony, but I think that there's been confusion on that. There's been a lot of people that have said that there's mathematicians on the committee when actually they have had maybe their PhDs in a different area, not necessarily mathematics. So I think I would be very cautious as to make sure that what you're looking at is an actual PhD in mathematics.
Thank you again for your testimony. And the chair will recognize John Freeman from the Pittsfield School District. And Dr. Freeman, you've asked for 10 minutes. Is there some way you can condense that?
Always, always.
Thank you very much.
Again, my name is John Freeman. I'm Superintendent of Schools in Pittsfield School District. And I'm here to voice my objection to 1508, the state putting the halt to the Common Core. In Pittsfield, our school board reviewed the Common Core a little over 2 years ago, and they chose not to adopt it. What they did choose to do was to ask us, the educators, to develop a curriculum, update the curriculum, and use the Common Core as a resource. When our teachers looked at the Common Core, they saw that as raising the standards that had existed at the time. So our teachers embraced the Common Core and are using that as the basis. And so as long as we would get all of our students in Pittsfield from kindergarten and guarantee that we'd have them and nobody else through 12th grade and graduate them at the end, we'd be really, really all set, and I wouldn't even be here today. But Pittsfield, like many other communities, has the experience of a relatively high degree of transience, particularly impacting high poverty communities with a high number of rental units, and you know how that works in our society right now. And so we find that kids coming in to Pittsfield from other school districts, we find kids coming in and going out, and kids, they're like boomerangs sometimes coming back around to Pittsfield, and we're delighted to have them. But the notion of different, radically different standards that are embraced by different school districts really puts kids at a disadvantage, particularly those kids who come from high poverty backgrounds. What I'd like to ask you to do, for example, is to take a look at what I'm passing out now. I also have the perspective of having moonlighted for several years as a writing teacher at Southern New Hampshire University and enjoyed that opportunity. One of the courses that I taught when I was there for several years was a course in argumentative writing. A course all by itself, English 121 I think it was. And it really focused the whole 8 weeks of the course on writing argument. I think for two reasons. One, that argument is the discourse of academia, so people needed to know how to take positions and support their positions, etc. But also because I think they saw that as a valuable intellectual exercise for people to understand what it takes to make a reasonable argument, particularly young people. When I got students in that class, for the most part, they were all over the map. And writing argument was very, very new to them. And quite honestly, you would have been shocked to see some of the writing. All high school graduates, mostly from New Hampshire high schools, you'd be shocked at the quality of the writing, or lack thereof, of the majority of the students. They worked hard, most improved, most passed, and most went on and had a successful academic career. But I'm just going to, because of my perspective as an English teacher and as a teacher of writing, I want to ask you to give your attention to those documents which I passed out. These first 3 pages are the standards from the New Hampshire Curriculum Frameworks, with which most of us have been operating for a number of years since the mid-90s. That was the last major shift. And you see highlighted in the center of the page are those 10th grade standards around persuasive writing or argumentative writing. So as you can see, using text structure that's appropriate, using the right structure, which by the way, that really was a huge weakness of kids coming into my class. On the bottom of that first page, the second one, select appropriate and relevant information, exclude extraneous details. And so at the next page, establishing a topic, stating and maintaining focus and control, writing with a sense of audience. And the next page, the third page, including facts and details that are relevant, addressing readers' concerns, etc. Those are all critical elements of argumentative writing. However, they are sufficiently vague that they could be taught at 100 different levels, not ways, because I'm not talking about curriculum now, but at 100 different levels by 100 different teachers, each making a judgment around what argumentative writing could or should look like based on those standards. Now, taking a look at the last page, which is from the Common Core State Standards, you'll see that argumentative writing is in the top part of that page. And I'll call your attention to the greater precision and the greater level of detail that the guidance that is offered to teachers and to parents and students in developing argumentative essays. So just taking a look at the left side, introduce precise claims, distinguish the claim from the alternative or opposing claims, create an organization that establishes clear relationships, and in B, develop claims and counterclaims fully. Use words, phrases, and clauses, establish and maintain a formal style, etc. So as I said, my experience in teaching argumentative writing at Southern New Hampshire University was that this was a major gap in students who I saw coming through. And these were hardworking students going, non-traditional students, people who were working during the day typically and going to class at night. Major gap. And I see this as a major weakness in not having high standards, as a major weakness, particularly for children and families from high poverty situations. So I endorse the state standards, the Common Core state standards, because I see it, and our teachers have experienced it, as a raising of the standards. And I'll just add one more item, because it helps us to maintain standards in Pittsfield as well. Our teachers, as we have some transients in students, we also have an unfortunately high turnover rate in Pittsfield. We had, I think I mentioned when I was with you last time, one of the lowest pay grades around our area. And it's not unusual for people to leave. We're a small school, so we have one teacher who teaches 9th and 10th grade English language arts. So if she were to leave, we'd have a whole new person come in there. And so without this level of detail and these specific expectations, it would be likely that the outcomes for that grade would just automatically sag when that teacher left us, when that teacher will leave us, and we replace that teacher. So I think for the purposes of Pittsfield, again, if we were totally insulated and self-contained, not a problem, because we're happy with the state standards as a basis, and we've gone on and added to them, as was described by a previous speaker. But in terms of the transients and kids coming in and out, I'd much prefer the higher standards of the Common Core than what we've had. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for the example. It was very helpful. Questions for Dr. Freeman? Representative Cordelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. With your comparison of standards, I was wondering if you had taken a look also at the, let's say, the Massachusetts English Language Arts.
I have not.
Thank you.
Further questions, Representative Ladd and then Representative Fraser.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming as administrator. As the chief administrator in your school district of Pittsfield, last year we passed legislation which gives the school board the responsibility in working with teachers and principals to develop an evaluation process, develop that policy. Is it your intent as an administrator to tie Smarter Balance to teacher accountability?
That has not occurred yet. It's not part of our discussion. Our teachers and administrators working with the school board had developed a new system for evaluation, really sort of a cutting edge. We've been asked to go and talk about it throughout the state, actually throughout the region as well, because of the collaborative nature of it and the rigorous nature of it as well. Our school board and teachers union have been satisfied to adopt the teacher evaluation system on a one-year basis, because they want us to learn from that system and to adjust it as we go along. There is a component of the evaluation system that is related to student outcomes, but it has not specifically been key to Smarter Balance at this point.
Thank you.
The answer is no.
Representative Fraser.
this is, I'm afraid more of a comment than a question, so I have to make it a would you believe. I'm from Concord, and so I read our local paper, The Monitor, which also covers the Pittsfield area, and I have read several articles about the huge success story in Pittsfield. And so I will put a question in here.
Well, that's a comment, you can make those comments a little bit wrong, so thank you.
And would you attribute that to the stories are about how you went to work and greatly improved the situation, the academic performance in Pittsfield, and I'm hearing that you attribute that to the Common Core.
I can't attribute it directly to the Common Core in and of itself. It's a part of the larger picture. We wanted to open up opportunities for students. We wanted to personalize learning so students became known, and they graduated from Pittsfield Middle High School with a realistic plan for the next step and the tools to actualize that plan. That's what our community told us. You know, when this whole thing started, the work in Pittsfield started with a series of community forums over the winter of 2008, 2009. And what our community told us is what we're making the best effort at delivering.
And one
Here's the
day
piece
we
here.
hope to invite you back so you can tell us the story of Pittsfield, because it really is a remarkable story.
But it's got to be longer than 10 minutes.
I know. Well, yeah. We have a little time for it.
Great, I'd be delighted to. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Representative Bohm, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking the question. If the state, for some reason, stopped the endorsement of Common Core, would you still use it in your?
We would in Pittsfield, absolutely. Yeah, it's embedded right now.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your testimony.
You're welcome.
The chair recognizes Laura Haney.
So, my name is Laura Haney, President of the American Federation of Teachers, and we opposed this bill, and I'll refer you back to our testimony for House Bill 1432 that was heard beginning of this week. So we support Common Core, we just want to delay the testing, so I'll close with that.
Laura, thank you very much for coming back. The chair will recognize Irving Richardson. Okay, Irving Richardson opposes the bill. The chair recognizes now William McKenzie. And Mr. McKenzie, you asked for 9 minutes. I hope you can condense it a little. Thank you. It would be appreciated.
Thank you. I'm not the math expert in the room by any means, but when somebody raises a question as to whether or not something is appropriate, I do listen. And if a mother raises a question, we should always. This is a letter to Secretary Riley, was it? No, Arne Duncan. Riley at the time, I'm sorry. By a professor who recognized how the math curriculums were inappropriate for the children and how they were, causing problems. And it wasn't just the one math professor, but these are endorsements from mathematics professors from across the country, from MIT and Harvard over to Stanford and you name it. But they all question the appropriateness of the math programs aligned with Common Core. And everyday math happens to be one of them. Just because 57, somebody correct me on this, how many members belong to the Chief Council of State School Officers? I looked it up online and I'm not sure whether the number 57 is correct, but if it is, it's such a small number of people to have been involved in originating a program that's forcing the schools in the country to be in lockstep with what they think. Now, I know the Governor's Council was in on it, and they invited people from New Hampshire, but I also know how consensus building works. I'll give you this to think about. If you pass that on down, look at the anguish in this photograph.
We've all seen this. Yeah, we've all seen this.
Okay, good. The little girl was asked to do some Common Core math problems in her homework, and the mother tried to help her and could not. It just wasn't logical. There's a couple of things that are wrong. Either the child was not given the appropriate foundation to reach the level to answer that question, but the anguish is there, we can see it. If that's happening, and we hear the reports in volume from across the country, we should be listening. Who wants to commit that girl to an assessment in the end where she's going to fail? And she also must submit, according to my reading of the flexible waiver, all students or children, especially the ones that may have a problem. One way to have a problem is to confuse a child's mind, whether it's in the field that I specialize in, which is reading methodology and not giving them the appropriate foundation to decode a word, and to cause confusion and bewilderment in their minds as a result, and then send them off to get them coded, and then to build an entire industry on that coding. I'm talking about the special education industry. A lot of it was just a hoax. It was wrong. The correct methods, the children were denied. And so it is, I believe, in that photograph there. We have an obligation and a duty to support that mother. I might be wrong, everybody in this room might be wrong, but that mother is entitled to make a choice. And she should be able to take that issue, right to the top. I'm just saying, you've seen this one as well. Psychologist says Common Core test equals cognitive child abuse. Well, yes, it does if they haven't got the appropriate foundation. Common Core lessons, and this is interesting, we heard testimony here today. Yes, it's only English language arts as a standard and math. Maybe true, maybe not true, depends on where you might be. But I would urge you to look closely at Dr. Terrence Moore's videos that are flashing across the countryside. In English language arts, it's very easy to inject politics. And so he details it in his testimony to either the Wisconsin legislature or Iowa, I'm not sure, but it's there for everybody to see. World War II is depicted, if you understand pictures and how you can induce children to believe a certain way. It's just this country, again, being portrayed as the bad guys. And that's not right, for children to be subjected to that type of thing. That's, this one is by Dr. Terrence Moore on Pearl Harbor. Things are being twisted around. We are getting social studies or history in our Common Core English standards. It's not fair. Sneaking politics into Common Core. We heard mention of advanced testing systems. Correction. Advanced testing was the name of the outfit. At the time, I was a member of the school board in Goffstown. And in fact, what made me go over to visit them was the School to Work initiative at the time. And there were regional liaisons that were sent out to try to coordinate that effort. The same as we hear complaints today. Yes, very subtly, a regional liaison could enter a school and say, do you have problems with this or that? And the liaison could suggest, well, yes, we have a solution for that, and we're testing on this or that. And they can encourage, the effort to move along. Almost every party in this proponent of Common Core in New Hampshire and the country, as far as that goes, had bought into Common Core prior to going back to advance. It's measured progress now. It's morphed into measured progress, a state contractor for assessments. On page 2 of Measured Progress's Common Core content, what to look for publication, it says this, and keep in mind that the State Board of Education and the governor and everybody else, supports it. They did it, but they were doing it, I believe, blindly. And Measured Progress says this. In 2012, content experts found that existing item banks and assessments could not adequately prepare students to meet the new standards and succeed on next generation Common Core assessments. Is that the little girl? I don't know, maybe it is. It takes decades sometimes for an education bureaucracy to turn around and correct things. And maybe the little girl mind is going to be bewildered and confused, maybe she'll hate math, who knows. But the mother could correct it very quickly in her local school district, as well as other parents throughout the country. And that's the essence of being in local control of education. When I was on the school board, I had written a letter to the editor questioning the waste of students' time for a questionnaire which asked the students something like,
Excuse me, Mr. McKenzie.
Yes.
You asked, I know for 9 minutes, I cautioned you about being brief. You now have been speaking for over 10 minutes.
I'm sorry.
So could you wrap up your remarks?
Yes, okay. That questionnaire, just I'll read one or two questions. How important is religion in your life? How often do you feel sad or depressed? In the last year, have you thought about killing yourself? When you have sex, how often do you and or your partner use condoms, etc.? The first time you have sex, well, this goes back to the psychological testing which is going to be imposed on all students. Now, can you imagine somebody having privy to the results of a young girl saying, well, I've had sex X number of times during the past month, and somebody in the school analyzing the results? That goes to the issue of privacy, and it could become some criminal activity, feeding into the hands of the wrong people. The essence of what I have to say is those who signed on to Common Core did not truly know what they were signing on to. And that's understandable. There's a lot of pressure, as Jonathan Kozol found out, in trying to change reading and miseducation by improper reading methods. So, we should
Could you summarize?
do what Wyoming, well, I wanted to give you this also. It's a hoax to think that we should be here talking about the standards. Two standards, English and math. The two easiest standards, which I think, by the way, are the easiest ones to set standards for. No problem. The chiefs that have signed on to Common Core were present all of these past few decades when the children were being abused in the classroom with the wrong mathematics textbooks, the improper methods of teaching them how to read. The chiefs were present, but they were silent. They should have been speaking out all along. Then when they come and they say, oh, now we like Common Core, maybe they would have some credibility. But they do not earn that credibility by any measure. And if you read the standards closely, you will see that the little girl in the picture and the early grades especially, where they assign students multiple tasks for, diagnosing some, a couple of books at a time. Children are just not going to do that at that age. And that's where they're inappropriate in my way of looking at it. So therefore, I would recommend that the committee do what, Wyoming is either about to do or it has already done. And that is to disregard and do away with any connection whatsoever with the Common Core standards. Let their schools pick some of the best out of it. That makes common sense. And then they wanted to develop their own standards. And that's, as Dr. Milgram says in his written testimony to you, for mathematics standards, New Hampshire should do it. And it's not that hard to do by any measure. Volunteers could cull the records of the best and say, here's what we should be doing. I think, in fact, the New Hampshire framework had a fairly good set of standards. So enhance on them if you will. I'll get out of your way.
Mr. McKenzie, thank you very much for your
You're
testimony.
welcome.
And the materials have been filed in the folder for this particular bill.
Oh, here,
Are available
I'll
for the
leave you
committee to read.
this.
And I am going to recognize, is Dr. Heather Driscoll here? Dr. Heather Driscoll opposes the bill. Is Danielle Harvey here? Danielle Harvey opposes the bill. Now I'm going to go back and read the names of the people who may have come at 11 o'clock when we had started at 10:30. Let me see. Martha Spalding?
Here.
Would you like to speak?
Sure. I'm going to be quick.
Yes, I know you were.
Okay.
Less than a minute.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair.
Do you want me to do it now?
No more pink
Oh,
cards.
okay.
No, these are pink cards that were submitted a week ago on Thursday, so,
Okay, good.
and I will honor those first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it very much. Nice to meet you all.
I just wanted to say that I oppose, I'm in favor of the bill. I oppose Common Core. And the main reason is that I truly do believe that it's designed to get America to submit to room-to-tomb workforce training. I do believe it's designed to drill into the students, to train them to be participants in the workforce. It imposes nationalized, top-down, centralized substandard criteria that will make school boards a rubber stamp. Who will the parents complain to? if their children are not getting Algebra 1 in 8th grade, if they're not getting critical thinking, if they're not being instructed in classical literature, if the standards are imposed by the national government and they're top down, this is a way to circumvent local school boards and the input of parents, which I believe is essential. And also, I think it's not fair to the teachers either. I think public school teachers have done a marvelous job. We had the best education in the entire world at one time in this country. And I think it's because we had parents and teachers at the local level, and that's what I'm concerned with. And I think that's the traditional New Hampshire value of self-government at the local level, and that's what I'm mainly concerned with. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Thank you. Is Angela
Pont.
I'm sorry?
Pont, P-O-N-T?
Yes, you asked for 3 minutes.
Sorry. Hi, thanks. My name is Angela Pont, and I'm from Portsmouth, and I support the bill. I have a list of reasons in all kinds of papers, and I prefer to just speak from my heart at this moment for the 3 minutes that I have. You spoke about, especially you, Mrs. Dial, spoke about the local control issue, and what about this bill, and if we got rid of Common Core, does that mean that we are now dictating to the school board, the local school boards, that they cannot have that now? I agree. I think it should be free choice as far as, and I think we should preserve local control of the standards and curriculum for our kids. But how can we preserve local control when there's been a system set up from the Smarter Balance Assessment tests on up now to the SATs? The SATs are going to be aligned with Common Core standards. So how can you get out from under it? Everyone will then be forced to teach to the test, teach to the Smarter Balance test. The teachers are going to be evaluated on this. Of course they're going to teach to this test. And then to get into colleges, you're going to be forced to teach to the Common Core standards, because you're not going to potentially get into the college courses or the colleges that you want to get into, because it's a top-down system. I personally feel crushed by it. It's a machine. And to say that we've had a say, I beg to differ. We moved here in the summer, we moved to Portsmouth in the summer of 2010. I read the Portsmouth Herald from cover to cover daily. And I've seen only recently, probably because of the slow implementation maybe in Portsmouth, I've only heard recently about the Common Core. Only in the past several months have I seen it hit our newspapers. And only a couple of times at that. So to say that we've had forums and debates and public input, I believe is erroneous, if not just a lie. Because we in Portsmouth, I've said this before, I went to the debate at the Seacoast Media Group on Common Core, and I made the joke, and everyone in the room laughed because it was true. We're trying to figure out how to solve our parking problem. We've had more paid forums, Portsmouth Listens, debates, informational hearings on the parking problem, but we have not addressed our most important asset, and that's our children. And I don't think we've had a say as parents to adopt these. You said the Department of Education adopt these standards. Endorsed. Well, they endorsed them, but I have a feeling that the race to the top money played quite a bit of a reason in that.
And we are not a race to the top state.
Well, you were offered the money. I know, because I went through all of the minutes of the meetings for the Department of Education back to before Common Core was adopted. And I talked, and Daphne, I forget her last name, spoke to the Race to the Top funds and how it was tied to the adoption of Common Core, and also the waiver to get rid of No Child Left Behind was attached to adopting Common Core. So it seems to me that there were carrots put out to the states. If you take Common Core, we'll do this for you. If you take Common Core, we'll do that for you. and now it trickles down to the school boards in the local communities. So I feel like I'm crushed as a parent, I don't have a say in what goes on with my kids. Now, I'm not gonna go into all the other things, because I'm worried about the privacy and the data mining as well. But I always look, when I see these initiatives, I look immediately to who is to gain. And based on the information that I've looked at from Sandra Stotsky and Milbroom and others who've complained, I'm not going to go into all that, who are speaking adamantly against the Common Core standards because they feel they're dumbing them down. The kids, I don't believe necessarily, are to gain from this initiative. I think that corporations who are using public policy for private gain and profits, they are the ones to gain. And I have lots of information here. The Silicon Valley Business Journal, the ed tech sector is expected to more than double in size to $13.4 billion by 2017. That explosive growth is fueled by Common Core's top-down digital learning and testing mandates. Who benefits there? I can give you a list also of the Gates Foundation. You can get it off their website. Lists upon lists of various organizations, Harvard, Fordham Institute, the National Chamber of Commerce received $1.38 million to support Common Core. And they also, and I can give you these articles about the, it's actually on the Chamber's website. The National Chamber of Commerce website talks about getting $1.38 million to help speak to the opposition of Common Core. So on their website, they're actually trying to speak to the opposition and actually convince people how great it is. The National PTA got $1 million. So it's like, you know, we don't have that kind of money. We're parents, okay? We don't have the power of Bill Gates, okay? They call him a venture philanthropist. Who's going to gain from all this technology that the schools need? Pearson, the biggest global writer of and publisher of education.
You asked for 3 minutes. And
Okay.
I'm giving you now
I appreciate the time that you gave me.
Would you?
I appreciate the time.
Well,
I bet if I was Bill Gates at the table, I'd get a little more
Thank
time.
you for your
But
testimony. I think these amounts are trivial in terms of the task that he wants them to do.
excuse me?
I think those amounts that you quoted are trivial in terms of the tasks that he wants them to do, that the Gates Foundation wants to accomplish. But anyway,
I think it's a conflict of interest,
thank you for your
more so
testimony.
than what you just described. I think it's a serious conflict of interest.
Thank you. The chair will recognize Debbie Pueir. Sue Grant. Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie Pueir did not indicate what her position was on the bill.
Getting hot and heavy.
So it is a new position. Sue Grant supports the bill. Dr. Joseph Hannon, PLA, he supported the bill. David DeWitt, who I mentioned earlier, he opposes the bill. And Bill Duncan, who I know has been floating around here, but is not here at present. We did send out a search committee to look for him, but he's not here. He opposes the bill. And with that, I will close the hearing on House Bill 1508. Thank you all for coming, and